Welcome, everybody, to this. This is our third Scribe Conversation series event. This one is called Writing as Ministry, and we have a special guest with us today, Sarah Viggiano Wright. Sarah graduated with her MDiv and MAC in 2012. Since that time, I'm going to stop sharing that for a moment. Since that time, Sarah has gotten the opportunity to write as part of her ministry. She recently published a Bible study on 1 Peter called A Living Hope. She also contributed to Co-Laborers and Co-Heirs, a family conversation. She has contributed to Christ in the Time of Corona and Beneath the Cross of Jesus, a Lenten Reflection. So today we get to talk to her about how writing became part of her ministry and how she's been challenged and grown by the experience. So I'd encourage you, as you listen in on this conversation between our scribe consultant, Grace Admiral, and Sarah Viggiano Wright, to think about how writing and communication might become part of your ministry, while in seminary, after seminary, and think about how that will integrate into your spiritual formation, how you can love and serve others through those gifts and through the cultivation of writing practices. And so I encourage you to be thinking about that as you listen to the conversation. You can post any questions that you have in the chat window here in Zoom. You just hit the chat button, put your question in. I'll be collecting those and presenting them at the end of our conversation, probably when there's about 15 minutes left, 5:15. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sarah and Grace to start our conversation.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Katie. So as Katie said, my name is Grace. I'm a current student in the MDiv program here at Covenant. It's my very first year, so I still feel like I'm very much learning the ropes, especially with doing it in a pandemic, but we're here and we're doing it. So really excited to talk to Sarah today. Just to start out, Sarah, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about yourself so we all can get to know you, both your connection to Covenant, but also just who you are as a person and what you're up to these days.
Oh my goodness. What a loaded question. First, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. This is just wonderful. I love Covenant, and I have for a long time. It's been a really special place for me. So I'm just thrilled to be able to be here with you all and just, get to share about that. So let's see where to start. I'll kind of give a little overview of my story because I think it does kind of give insight into where I am today and how writing got threaded into that tapestry. But I became a Christian through Reformed University Fellowship. I was at TCU at the time, Texas Christian University, and I developed a relationship with my campus minister. And really, since becoming a Christian, had a lot of curiosity. And so he was like, you need to go to seminary. And I was like, okay, cool. People actually study the Bible for their living. This is amazing. My senior year of college, he started training me with a couple of other of my friends who were interested in doing the RUF internship. And so through that and through meeting with my intern, I was like, man, being an RUF intern is like a really cool job. Maybe I should do that or just explore that. And God in his kindness led me straight through a wide open door, which I was really, really shocked about. I kind of expected it to be a struggle and it wasn't that hard to get there. So I feel really thankful for that. After 2 years of working with college students at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, I felt even more confirmed that seminary was going to be a part of my life. I initially thought, I started off college as a counseling or as a psychology major. And in becoming a Christian, kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit, didn't really see a lot. I didn't really have a lot of interest in counseling. I really wanted to help people and I wanted to be in ministry. And again, God in his kindness through the internship showed me how counseling was actually really, really helpful with that. I found myself as this, college graduate, and I was like, man, these girls are going through real life issues, and I can cry with them and I can pray with them, but I don't know if I know how to really help them cope or lead them down a healing path. And so I think my interest in counseling, particularly Christian counseling at Covenant, really, really peaked after that 2-year internship. And so I started seminary at Covenant wanting to pursue both an MDiv and an MAC. I really wanted to drink deeply from the text. I wanted the Greek. I wanted the Hebrew. I loved it. Every time I did a word study, it actually made me giddy and enhanced my love of God and my love for the Bible. And yet, without knowing how to really show how the rubber meets the road and apply it to real people in real struggles in the real world, which I was not good at that. I could get some content down, but did I really know how to love people well? So when I did the MDiv and the MAC, I think God really helped show me how much more to both of those degrees there was than just simply acquiring content. It was about being humble, being a lovable person. I had my whole life to read theology books, but did I really know? And could I apply grace to my life? Could I apply grace to other people's lives? And did I really know how to love people well? And I think he showed me a lot of that while I was in seminary. Along the way, I started as an unmarried woman, and I met this classmate of mine, and didn't really think much of him at first, but we started dating second year. We got married third year. Fourth year, we figured everything out. And fifth year, we walked across the stage pregnant with both degrees. He also has an MDiv and an MAC. So that is our story in a very, very condensed nutshell. And then 2 years after graduation, we started working for RUF, and that took us to Orlando, Florida, and now most recently to San Antonio, Texas.
Thank you for sharing. That sounds like a whirlwind of a journey.
Whirlwind is a perfect word.
Wow. Yeah. And I think it's just so helpful to hear how much of a process it was for you to discern what you wanted to do with counseling and MDiv, and realizing how much you loved both and needed both. I think that's encouraging for a lot of us who are in one or perhaps both of the programs. I'm wondering if you want to kind of focus on your time at Covenant. I know it was a while back, so as much as you can remember, but I wonder how you felt about writing at the time. I know you mentioned doing the word studies. I recently did that in Greek as well and really enjoyed it. But just wondering kind of how did you feel about the writing that you, of course, had to do with a lot of the papers that are required?
Yeah. To be perfectly honest, writing as a vocation or part of my vocation was not remotely on my radar, truly and honestly. I wrote because there were assignments that required me to. I don't even remember being all that great at it. I don't remember being oh, I'm getting all of these amazing grades on these papers. Maybe I should consider this vocationally. That just wasn't a part of my story. In fact, I even remember being with other classmates of mine and being he is going to be the next great scholar of our time, or he's this person needs to write a practical theology book because I just love their ethos, or I love what they have to say. And I was in a category separate from them in my mind. Truly writing just wasn't on my radar at all. And I did it as a function of seminary, but not anything that I thought I was really going to have to hone in on or craft in any way.
Yeah. So I think we're wondering how did writing happen? I guess it does sound like it was the kind of thing that sort of happened to you.
A little bit, yes and no. So I've always wanted to be in ministry, and I wanted to be a teacher. Ever since I became a Christian, and probably largely at the influence of things like RUF Summer Conference, where we would have these speakers talk and they would have, you know, seminars or some sort of lesson, I thought, I really would love to be able to share God's word like that, or share on some topic from a biblical view like that. I thought it was amazing, and it lit my heart on fire. So I think my passion has always been teaching, but of course you have to write down your thoughts when you're a teacher. So there's a necessary function in that. And I think, yeah, I think over time it came into like crafting out lessons and whatnot. Ironically, as far as First Peter is concerned, it actually started off as a freshman Bible study when I was an RUF intern. That's kind of where it started, and then it slowly evolved into more and more as I learned more and more about the book of First Peter. But I can tell you that story at another time. The writing, I think, for me has been a part of the teaching function. And again, never really thought, oh, I'm going to publish what I write because, you know, people are asking for it or calling for it, or it seems helpful. It did kind of happen relationally, and which is both beautiful and also humbling, because I can still pinpoint to say, like, no, God gave this to me. There was really nothing I did that brought on this sort of gift in my life, or this like path in my life. But for First Peter specifically, that freshman Bible study, one more step, you know, in the evolution, turned into a paper. Started as a paper, a term paper that I wrote for Jimmy Agan's class on the imitation of Christ. He had this lesson on 1 Peter 2:21 that just absolutely blew my mind. And it was because I geeked out on the fact that he unpacked this exegetical word of hupogrammaton, which is one of the major words when it says that Christ gave you an example for you to follow. That example right there is a one-time use word, a hapax legomena, and Jimmy was just telling us all these things about what it meant and what it signified, and every single little bit of me was just lighting up. I was just on fire. I loved the lesson. He taught it so well, and I was just like, who needs to hear this? Everybody needs to hear this, you know? So then a few semesters later, I was in a communication practicum with Mary Beth McGreevy, and one of our progressive assignments, that was basically the whole semester's worth of work, was turning some lessons into like a complete retreat package. She kind of taught us like how to teach and how to teach in a series. And so I chose First Peter, and using that lesson that Jimmy had built on as kind of the apex of that retreat. And then after seminary, I got asked by a few churches to speak, and they were like, do you have any material that you think is really like helpful, or here's our context? And I'm like, well, do your people need hope, or do they need to understand their identity in Christ? Because it's all in First Peter. So it really kind of evolved from this like freshman Bible study to this now seminary vetted conversation, to this like retreat lesson and package, and then eventually a book, which that story is a whole other phase of it in and of itself.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we would love to hear as much as you're willing to share about that journey to this First Peter. Would you describe it as a Bible study, I guess?
Yeah, I would. You know, it kind of operates like several things. I think it can kind of be lay commentary. It's definitely written with a devotional voice, but at the end of every week, there's, you know, one lesson per day. At the end of every week, there is a community Bible study. You can do it as an individual, but it's really kind of meant to be a community study. And so I really kind of think it has something in there for everyone. The format came from my publisher, and to their credit, I just really think that it has so much in there. So whether you want to pick it up and do it by yourself or do it with a friend or do it with your church group, I think that there could be something in there for everyone. I've even been amazed and so humbled that like some of my friends who are teaching elders in our denomination are using it as a part of their sermon prep, which is like, again, I can't even express into words how meaningful that is to me. But yeah, so it's a little bit of everything. The way that it came about was I was working for an organization called Docent, and Docent helps equip churches and pastors in their educational ministries, would be a very reduced way of saying what their services offer. But I was working for Docent, and I was talking with a client on a phone call at this retreat center in Orlando that I frequented when I needed some private space. And a friend of my husband's who I'd never met, this Episcopalian priest, overheard my conversation, and he was like, "You sound like you know how to teach the Bible. Like, do you write it all?" And I said, "Well, I help other people write. I edit their materials and help them teach their congregations." And he goes, "I'm going to connect you with my friend who has a publishing company, and he's always looking for Bible teachers and writers. Maybe you could connect with him." He reached out to me, and I don't have a lot of time, but I feel like you are kind of what he's looking for. And I was like, okay. So I send off this email, and I assume it's going to go into the email abyss, right? Like, I don't know this guy. He doesn't know me. I name dropped the guy that we have in the middle. I'm not really expecting much of it. And for 2 weeks, nothing happens. And I was like, okay, there you go. That's what I get for thinking and hoping and whatnot. And finally, he does get back to me, and he's like, "Yeah, and actually, some of the projects we have in the work are, we're doing this over here, and then we're doing one on First Peter." And I was like, believe it or not, First Peter is my jam. So he was like, "Great." And amazingly enough, I didn't even have to, y'all, I feel so bad about this. I didn't even have to submit a writing sample. I think he was so in need of people writing that he was like, "How about we co-author this book together, and you take these chapters and let's do it." And I was like, okay, great. So I get the first section, and as I'm submitting it to him, he's like, "You know what? You take it. You take the whole thing." And I was like, oh, okay. And so it turned into that, and he was like, "Okay, great. Thanks for these devotions. How about also a Bible study?" And I was like, "What?" And so the Bible study gets added in. And then the very last piece of it, which still blows me away, is, okay, hey, we just made this relationship with this company in California that they make all these media videos for Christian media. Can you write 6 Bible lessons to be read out on video, and then we'll film you teaching it? Different from what's in the book already. And I was like, okay. And then on the flight to Houston to film, he was like, "Also, we're going to need 1 blurb per devotion. So 42 blurbs. See you tomorrow." So but my husband Lee and I laugh at it, because had I been presented that entire package at first, I would have turned it down. I had young kids. My kids are still young. My youngest is 4. He was then 2. I would have absolutely passed up on this opportunity, but because it kept on incrementally increasing and I was already in, it was nuts. It stressed us out. I'm not going to lie about that, but I'm on this side of it very grateful that it all happened the way it
did. That is remarkable. Thank you for sharing that journey. Woo! And I think it's such a good point that sometimes we're not going to say yes to the whole thing, but sometimes God just gives us a little bit and a little bit more until suddenly we're doing a lot more than we expected.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, because I think this is something that maybe many of us might relate to when it comes to writing or figuring out what we're called to do. At what point did you feel like, okay, I'm a writer now? Or are you still kind of waiting for that?
Yeah. Emotionally and mentally, I am still waiting for that. but when you have a whole book that you did, there is something a little undeniable about that. It probably didn't connect with me with the chapters that I contributed to some of these other books, although I'm actually really, really proud of what I was able to contribute with co-laborers and co-heirs. We affectionately call it Coco. So if I call it Coco, it's she does mean a lot to me, but she is a book.
And real quick, can you just summarize kind of what that book is for those who are not familiar with it?
Yeah, so Coco, this is what the cover looks like. I love the design. Co-laborers and co-heirs is basically, the subtitle is a family conversation, and I think that that's what it is. It is primarily by women inside the PCA to vocalize all sorts of experiences of what it's like to be a woman in the PCA. There are 3 major sections in it, which are listen, learn, and love. And I think that those are kind of the responses that we would love people to have to the book, to listen to the stories of our sisters, all of whom have had their own beautiful moments in the PCA and then also their own struggles with the PCA. To learn from the Bible, learn from good and healthy relationships, to learn what it is that we're asking for, which, newsflash, no one is asking for a pulpit on Sunday morning. We just want to utilize our gifts and our degrees for God's glory and for the good of the church. And then the love would be like, what does it look like to practically apply that to the church at large, not just organizationally speaking, although there is application for that, but globally speaking, the whole church, what does it look like to love women well, to lead with women, to need and crave their feedback, to have them at the forefronts of conversations, to listen, to perpetually value them because they are valuable, full stop. And so that's what Coco is about. And I love it and I'm really proud of it. And I think that Brittany Smith and Doug Serven, the co-editors, did a phenomenal job. And it was a joy to work with them. I love that project. I'm super, super proud of it.
And just as a quick timeline thing, was that before or after your study on 1 Peter?
That was before. This was actually the first thing that I wrote, was my chapter for co-laborers, co-heirs. Brittany was collecting these stories from these women, and on a RUF wives retreat, which she and I are both RUF wives, she was talking about this writing project, and I was like, Brittany, this sounds amazing. I'm so proud of you. I mean, Brittany's wonderful. If she ever writes anything on her own and she has a chapter in there, just sit at her feet. She's phenomenal. I would love to sit at her feet. She just is a wonderful person, and so sharp. So she was writing on this, and she was like, I think I still need a chapter with sort of a biblical or theological case for women in leadership. And she was like, do you want to write it? And I was like, I'll try. And then as I started studying the Hebrew of Genesis 1 and 2, I was like, oh, no. God very much intends for women to be alongside men in the church and in life. And so it was really, I feel blessed to have gotten that particular assignment and to have worked on it, because it made me love and appreciate the way that women were created even more. I feel like Coco has allowed me to celebrate being a woman and celebrate other women in a way that maybe I more shallowly experienced on the other side of it.
And everyone, I just reread the chapter in that book. It's very well done. So I would highly recommend reading it. We'll link all the various books that Sarah has written or books she's contributed to at the end, but just want to give a little plug for that. I am wondering, as you are writing or thinking about writing, what kind of is your motivation? Because of course you don't only have the theological background, but also the counseling background. And I'm sure that's still very much a desire for you to continue to encourage people. So yeah. I guess the way I'd be curious to hear you talk about it is, when you're writing, like, who are you envisioning? Like, what is it that's driving you and helping you decide what to say?
That's such a great question. I don't always have one particular target in mind, but I will say that the way that God has made my mind is when I hear something, I will think of in that situation who I want to have hear it and who would benefit from this. Because I've been in campus ministry so long, it's often my college students. I'm like, they need to hear this or whatnot. Recently, I've taken on the role of a counselor. I work for Global Counseling Network part-time, and I love it. I love the organization. I love what they stand for. And so right now, a lot of my current writing materials or just the certain leans that I have are more directed towards my clients, but in an extension of those clients, really humans, or at the very minimum, Christian humans. So I hope to, sooner than later, Lord willing, have some counseling related materials out there as well. But honestly, my target, most generally speaking, is the church.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think we especially need that from women, because usually you often just see women writing for women, which nothing wrong with that, but just so valuable to also have women's voices for the church at large. So really value your work.
Oh, thank you.
I'm also wondering, just to get even more into the nitty-gritty of your writing process, I know that every writer is different. Even those who didn't expect to be a writer, it just kind of came to them. So I'm wondering if you have any specific habits that help you as you write, how you kind of get yourself to do the hard work of writing and editing and all of that.
Yes. Well, I'm very thankful for a very supportive partner in my husband who allows me probably the key ingredient, which is time. I don't ever have enough of it, which is my issue, not his, but he is really, really supportive when it comes to that. Our children are at this current time, 8, 6, and 4 years old. And so, they are still in that little phase, not tiny, tiny anymore, but, that is always a perpetual struggle, is just finding time when I'm able to write and when I have the emotional capacity to write, where I'm not wound up in the to-dos of the day or whatnot. So right now that feels like a very, very sweet spot to find, like needle in a haystack. But when I find it, I do enjoy utilizing it. My process, I tend to be a verbal processor and I tend to think out loud. So I dictate a lot or use like microphone dictation, where it's writing out my thoughts as I speak them rather than type them. I can't wait for my hands to catch up with my mind. I'll lose everything. The other thing is I really, really thrive in conversation with people. And so I have found focus groups or even just courting people over coffee and just saying, hey, can I hear your thoughts on this? Can I get some feedback on this? Can I present this to you and you tell me if you understand or if it benefits or blesses you? So those are my processes. I wish I was this internal processor where I could just carefully craft these things all by myself, but I am utterly dependent on other people for basically everything I write.
I think that's honestly a helpful perspective to hear, since I think the stereotype is that writers are hermits and it's so isolating and lonely. But of course, even using our words verbally is, I think, kind of a form of writing, or at least in the brainstorming process. So it's encouraging to hear your experience with that.
I understand why they're hermits. It's just that's not my life.
That's hard. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I would also love to hear, as you've been writing, and I guess it has just been a couple of years since that study was published, but what do you feel like you've learned either about writing itself or about yourself as a person through the process of writing and publishing?
Oh my goodness, there are so many things. I have learned that every piece requires a specific voice. So for example, when I teach, my audience is a collective people. I'm teaching a seminar or I'm reaching out to more than just one person. However, when I was writing A Living Hope, and when things take on a more devotional bent, my editors were giving me feedback that I really needed to hone in on an audience of one, assuming that one person was picking up a book and reading it. And so that was a good exercise for me. It did not come naturally. It took some time, but I eventually got there. So I would say a lot of it is, what is the piece about? Is it devotional? Is it commentary oriented? Is it global in its perspective? Who are you communicating it to? So that all took time. I learned that publishing is super complex. Every publisher has their own lean and their own bent and their own voice and their own process. And that even though the book has my name on it, they're putting their name on it too. And so they do have lots of input and lots of feedback. They care very much, and they're very invested in the process. And so it's not just an artist-driven thing. It's actually a collaboration between the writer and the publisher. So I definitely learned that I had to, in a sense, share this endeavor, even though it was deeply personal. I had to share it, and I had to be flexible, and I had to be open to feedback that wasn't necessarily from my perspective or according to my bent, but it was what my publisher needed or what they wanted. So that was a really, really good learning process, play nice with others. And then just even the timeline of it is so complex. Like, I honestly think I spent more time editing than I did writing, if that makes sense, just because writing was about getting an initial draft or thought out there. But editing was the fine crafting, the fine tuning. So that was really, really interesting to learn. Some publishers have certain times in the church calendar. Like, so for example, I released a book on hope. And so for my publisher, it was very important that we did it right after Easter to capitalize on that resurrection power of hope. Other publishers are different in their timing, and they would rather have this super well-crafted, tested thought out. So, I mean, the variety absolutely shocked me. But yeah, really everything, I had everything to learn. I knew nothing.
That's awesome. I'm wondering, because you mentioned how difficult it was to kind of go through that publishing process and working on recognizing it. It's not just you, but it's also their name that's kind of out there in the world. How did you deal with, I guess I see it in some ways as kind of losing part of your freedom in that? And I'm wondering also, with any like criticism you received, even if it was kind and gentle, like it's still criticism.
Yeah.
How did you go about kind of working through that and accepting it and learning to make those changes in your own writing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously criticism, critique, whatever you want to call it, it feels personal because you're writing about things that you're passionate about. So sometimes it took longer than others to recover from the type of criticism. Maybe I thought something was super well thought out, and I got the feedback back that it didn't make sense. And I was like, wait a minute, I've like taught this at conferences. How does this not make sense to you? So it was definitely a check in humility and an openness to the fact that like, I am early on this journey. Even if I were advanced on this journey though, I should still be open and listening to other people. And so I think after a while, I realized that me speaking to my editor on the phone was a lot more effective than email for me, and just understanding what her feedback meant, and also in me communicating my intention for the piece, whichever particular piece it was. I also learned that editors are amazing magicians that make things like readable and interesting and understandable. And so I think I saw it initially in Coco. I felt like there were several things that I was unclear on that I just feel like they waved a magic wand over and just made it phenomenal. So I think I learned, like, okay, you can trust editors, or at least always entertain their feedback. And so I think God was just kind in, giving me doses of humility, and then just making me resilient and open to hearing what other people had to say, because ultimately the purpose of writing is not for me. And so why wouldn't I listen to someone communicating about how other people might interpret or hear what I'm teaching? So yeah, I sometimes it is a little painful, but I think just like almost everything in life, God uses it as refinement. And ultimately their critique was because they were for me and for the project and for it getting out and being really, really good. And so we had a common goal in mind, and I needed to be able to trust them in that.
Wonderful. So just, I think, a couple more questions before we transition into questions from the audience, I guess is what you call the Zoom audience too. Feels very different. I'm wondering how you feel like your writing has aided you in your ministry to people, whether that's like using what you've written. I don't know if you feel comfortable like giving it to people that you're interacting with, but just how it's aided you as you are seeking to be a servant for Christ and to love people.
It's a really good question. There are times where in conversation, I will say, like, actually, like, I wrote something on this and I feel like it best communicates my views on it. Particularly when people are like, how do you feel about women's roles in the church? And I'm like, I have a chapter on that. Yeah, I think sometimes it's really, really challenging for me to put myself out there and feel like I'm self-promoting. I have the reality that I want the book to sell, not because I'm going to get rich, because that's not going to happen. But so in publishing, they give you an advance on your royalties from the book. And so until your book reaches a certain threshold, you actually owe your publisher, not the other way around. They don't owe you. And so in my contract, I have a certain amount of time for my book to sell before they either cut me a check or I cut them one. So I'm like, can I break even? That is the goal, is to break even. So yeah, my kids are not going to college off of this book at all. They might get a stick of gum 3 years from now. But yeah, the self-promotion is really, really challenging for me, but I'm working on that voice of like, I have a resource on this. Yes, I happen to have authored it, but this is helpful for this or that or the other. Some people are great at social media promotion and they're great at all this other stuff. That is not how I am made. But I recognize it's a skill that I need to acquire. So I'm in process on that one.
Yes, aren't we all? I'm wondering where you are in your writing journey right now. What comes next for you?
Almost immediately after releasing The Living Hope, I was like, I want to do this again. So I hope another Bible study is in the works, another book of the Bible. I also want to release emotionally focused literature or counseling focused literature. I'm working on a couple of projects right now to that end, but both of them are more on the long-term side than the short-term. They're very new. One of them is still in its infancy, but I'd like to work on that. And the one in its infancy is like a children's series of Christian counseling focused literature that communicates to the emotions of a child's heart while reminding them of God's truth and goodness to them. And so I have to connect with an illustrator, which is a whole different ball game than just a type editor who does like the layouts and the pictures and whatnot in a adult targeted book. And so I'm on the threshold of just even getting down the names of potentially interested people. So that would be a project that I'd love to see into fruition. But one of my challenges is that I have a lot of ambition and not a lot of time in the day. And so I pray and hope that God in his kindness would see it fit to have that be a perpetual part of the journey forward. But I can't say right now what the next immediate step is, other than, and my advice to anybody in a similar position would just be like, go ahead and just start writing it down, write stuff down. Oftentimes when you approach a publisher, they ask you for samples, or they ask you for like the first couple of chapters. And so you're like, oh, well, I've been sitting on this thought for 10 years, but I haven't written anything down on it. That won't be very helpful. But having some chapters ready to go, or having an idea, having an outline of what the whole work would be like and how those chapters fit in, all of that is really, really helpful in trying to get your foot in the door with publishing. So I need to take my own advice and continue to do that and work on that, chip away at it.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It has definitely been a delight to hear from you and your experience. And I think now we'll transition to some questions from our audience.
Okay.
All right, we've gotten some really interesting ones. I think there's one that kind of ties into what you guys were just talking about like you're not getting rich, yet. with the writing. But Paulo asks if it was, financially speaking, worth the professional time investment, or is this writing more of like a sacrificial gift that you are giving to the kingdom? He was also wondering, I thought this was a really interesting question because life is complex, how your role as a counselor, a wife, a mother, whatever other professional or ways you serve or just live are helped or hurt by these compounding projects. Writing just takes time. There's no shortcuts. So how do you balance your roles and fit writing into that?
Yeah, great questions. So the first question is, at the moment, my writing projects have been more labors of love. And I'm okay with that for now. I, of course, would love for it to be more than that. And again, not in I imagine one day retiring off of book sales, because that would be like Brene Brown level of achievement in life. And that's honestly not my goal in writing. I truly don't ever think, I don't think that's realistic. Not in a self-critical way, but just in a, there's one Brene Brown and there's, one Stephen King. And we are in Christian literature, Reformed Christian literature. So our niche alone would probably severely limit the retirement funds I would have. But like I said, I am really hoping to buy a stake of gun 3 years from now. So I would say a labor of love, at least right now, is where I currently am. The work-life ambition balance, it's hard to say right now, because my kids are human beings that are right in front of me, demanding for snacks and, soccer lessons and whatnot. They are probably the biggest consumers of my time and my emotional energy. And I'm thankful for that. I want to remain thankful for the perspective and balance of them only being little once. And as much as my ambition and drives me to want to produce something now, I think I am constantly meditating and focusing on the fact that all of these endeavors will take time. And that if I had to pick one thing to do well over all the other things, it's that I don't want my family sacrificed on the altar of my ambition. I love counseling, and it does require a lot of my emotional capacity and my relational capacity. And so I'm really, really early into it. So being perfectly honest with you, I am still figuring out what my good and healthy balance is with that. And because both of those things are true, my writing is on the back burner right now. But that disconnection from it makes me miss it and makes me want to figure out what to shift, probably in the counseling department, so that I can put writing a little bit more on the forefront. But that's just currently where I am in life. My life has had those two major transitions: the move to San Antonio in a pandemic, and the new job of counseling. And so I am in the process of having those things settle and learning what my healthy balance of that looks like.
Thanks, Sarah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate hearing how it sounds like you have many good things to choose from, and that we can, I think, while equipping ourselves and investing in our education, kind of really desperately want to have like a picture of how are we going to use this? What are we going to do with it? What am I spending all this time and money buying books? And, how is this going to play out? And I feel like I've heard a theme throughout this conversation of you just kind of answered what was good to serve in that day. And then the day after that, you served that day. And the day after that, you looked and said, what did God give me on this day? And I heard you, hearken back to humility. And I have a feeling that there have been days and weeks and months where this has been like some really deeper heart work as you've walked through all of this.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate kind of hearing and seeing how you are moving with God's grace through these opportunities. And I am celebrating the ways that He has used your faithfulness to equip and serve His church. I have another question from our audience. This is from Pont. She writes, Sarah, great to see you and hear your voice. And she asks, how do you navigate, or have you navigated, discipling older women in the context of retreats, studies, or church ministry? She brings up that in Titus 2, the church is called to have older women discipling younger women, but women with seminary degrees are often thrust to the front, no matter what, like the age or experience of the people who are there to be taught. So how have you navigated that dynamic?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Ponch, I love seeing your face too. I love it. So fun. So yeah, I love that. Okay, so speaking of Titus, I do think that there was a wisdom and a respect that was garnered with physical age or chronological age, but I think a larger principle at hand, the extension of that, what is ostensibly extended by that, is the air quotes wisdom being imparted by those who have the wisdom to those who don't have the wisdom, and also then the wisdom and humility of those people in the audience to receive it and to really kind of say, like, this is God's goodness, no matter where it is found, is to be celebrated. So if it's coming from the mouth of a 15-year-old girl or a 82-year-old man, we can find cause to celebrate in that. So when it comes to teaching conferences, and oftentimes I was the youngest woman in the room, sometimes by multiple life stages. Like the first time I taught a conference, I was unmarried without children, and I think everyone else was at least married with a couple of kids. So I was like really, really behind the game. I was super intimidated because I think we do revere age, and I think that there are good reasons why we revere age. And so I think I had to really pray and trust that God is the equipper, God is the caller, God, the Holy Spirit is inside of me. And on one hand, I am a sojourner among sojourners, and we're all in that boat figuring it out together. And, I may have had more time to study, and I might be the one at this point being the communicator, but really I'm not doing it as an expert. I'm doing it as a fellow journeyman. I do think, though, God has been gracious in blessing me. I have a friend from Orlando, and she calls me her friend mentor, and which is so sweet and utterly ironic, because in life, I want her to be my mentor. She is a wonderful wife and mother and grandmother to her family, and a wonderful church servant. And for some reason, she calls me her mentor. And so I think that she's just taught me the beauty in just kind of supporting women in whatever gifts they have in the church. So I pray for any woman at the forefront of a ministry. I pray for her to take ownership in Thanksgiving of what God has equipped her with and gifted her with, knowing that He has called her to that moment, and that the Holy Spirit inside of her is the one really convicting the hearts and doing the communicating, and she's the vessel. And then I also pray for the community around her to be receptive, to be supportive, to be encouraging, to be defensive if needed. Just recognizing that the same Holy Spirit who calls, our teaching elders to the pulpit is the one at work inside her life, calling her to that conference. And that is a beautiful gift that same helper is inside of her, leading her to that mission, to that field. So I think there's a lot of rest to take in the fact that the Holy Spirit is with her. But yeah, it is. It's challenging. It's definitely challenging when you look at the paper statistics of it all. So best to look at the Holy Spirit of it all, I guess.
Thank you. I think that is really heartening for everybody to hear and remember that we're not in this work alone. Writing is, we talked about that trope of it can be lonely, but you're not alone. Yes. I think we have time for, one last question before we all have to say good evening and good night. It has been a real pleasure to have you share with us today. But last question, this one also comes from Paulo. And he's writing about how you were able to pursue both an MDiv and an MAC. And we've heard today about how you have a real passion for like biblical studies research, and you're also a counselor. So his question is, did you feel you were equipped well enough to integrate biblical studies and Christian psychology in your writing by doing both the MDiv and the MAC, or how much of this synthesis work have you done on your own? How have you kind of brought those two worlds together?
Yes. So thankful for Covenant Seminary and the ways that they teach the counseling to be absolutely under the authority of Scripture, and discerning of, again, celebrating God's goodness wherever it is found. Yes to that. I feel like that was just absolutely modeled, demonstrated, and reinforced at Covenant. And I feel super, super grateful for that training. I come from a predominantly non-Christian family. And so I think my whole life has been, in some senses, a training grounds of communicating the gospel in lay terms or accessible terms to people who may or may not be opposed to Christian language. And so I think that integration of counseling and Scripture and all of that, I think it is something that probably God has equipped me to do. However, I feel like Covenant really does do a good job in preparing people. I think that there are also pursuits that each person can have where, maybe it's I mean, truly loving the non-Christians around them, or loving whatever that audience is around them they're hoping to communicate to, listening, in a sense, to what their feedback is and what their experience is, and really just kind of be in the practice of constantly communicating either counseling terms in biblical language, or biblical language in counseling terms, or lay terms, or whatever, what have you. But I feel extremely grateful to have had the ability, the time, the calling to have pursued both and to be able to integrate them. I really cannot imagine one without the other. I don't want to imagine one without the other. And I think both will be a part of any endeavor I do, whether it is teaching, counseling, writing, raising my children, loving my neighbor, going to church, you know, making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I really think that that I'm grateful for it, and I think that God has used it in all of those things to show me His goodness and His continued mercy. And I think my bent is then to continue to show that to others, however He would have me. So I think, yeah, I think that's it.
Encouraging. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hear that as a wonderful takeaway. As our attendees here, you know, continue to write and to interact in their classes, to look for those opportunities to practice that skill of translating this truth for those around them, of recognizing, I think, like, theology just doesn't happen in a book.
Yeah.
You know, how is it going to, it can soak into every particle of our day. And it is intended for every particle of everyone's day. And we get to learn here how to reach into that goodness and bring it out where others can see it. That's wonderful. I am going to share here in our chat window. I have both links to your writings that are available in our library. Oh, and the chat window took out all the spaces in between them, so that just looks like gobbledygook. Well, there are 3 links there of Sarah's books that are available in our library. I'll try to do that one more time so it's more clear. Oops, never mind. I won't do that more clearly because I can't hit enter in between them. Okay, so you can find links there for Sarah's works in our library, and I also put up some links if you'd be interested in adding them to your own library. We will be posting a recording of this conversation on the library workshop page, and those sources will also all be listed there. So I want to thank everybody who came today. And I know several people have already in the chat window expressed thanks for how you shared your heart with us today, Sarah. And so I want to wish us all a good, restful evening. I believe it's going to rain here in St. Louis, so I hope that we can enjoy the cool weather rolling in. And again, thank you very much, Sarah. It was a real pleasure and honor to hear from you today.
Oh, thank you all so much. It was such a pleasure being with you. I'm deeply honored, and I just wish each of you blessings on, like what Katie said, the next thing that God calls you to, and just pray for all of that for each of you, and just excited to be a part of this group. So thank you for